The Coalition for Genocide Response was established as a direct response to the failures of states to address genocide. Over the years, we've seen that despite the fact that we are seeing horrific atrocities perpetrated against religious ethnic minorities around the world, states always act too little and too late to be able to prevent such atrocities from occurring. We work with parliamentarians, we work with governments, we work with NGOs, experts on an action plan how to address genocide and how to ensure that we fill the gap in genocide responses. Over the recent years, we've been working, for example, with parliamentarians in the UK trying to respond to the atrocities perpetrated against the Yazidis in Iraq, atrocities against the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, most recently against the Uyghurs in China. And also over the last few months, we've seen also horrific atrocities against the Tigrayans. And these are all cases that we've been working on. We've been trying to engage governments, we've been trying to engage parliamentarians to speak up on behalf of the victims of such horrific atrocities. We see persecution based on religion or belief around the world, and we see such persecution to various degrees, at a different scale. Some of the worst atrocities against religious minorities that we've seen over recent years were, for example, in Iraq. In Iraq, Daesh, back in 2014, unleashed horrific atrocities against Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities. Those religious minorities have been subjected to mass murder, rape, sexual violence, abductions, forcible displacement, and many more. And unfortunately, despite the fact that media are not covering the situation of those religious minorities anymore, those atrocities are not ongoing. The genocide against the Yazidis and Christians is considered to be ongoing. And for example, even right now, over 2,700 Yazidi women and children are still missing. They are still being enslaved by Daesh. And at this stage, we still don't know what happened to them or where exactly they are. And we are trying to get them back. We are trying to locate them and get them back. And also at this very moment, again, we are not hearing about the Daesh atrocities anymore. Daesh is trying to revive its caliphate in many parts of Syria and Iraq. We know that there are 10,000 Daesh fighters in Syria and Iraq today, and we are not talking about it. And Daesh has been using the pandemic to re-establish its caliphate, and will be also using the US withdrawal from Iraq later this year to revive its caliphate. And this is an ongoing threat to the religious communities in Syria and Iraq. Another very important case is, of course, of the genocidal atrocities against the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. Over there, Rohingya Muslims have been slaughtered by the Burmese military. And of course, some of the atrocities happened in 2016, 2017, and resulted in mass exodus of over 700,000 Rohingya Muslims to Bangladesh. But at the same time, of course, now that the military is in power, this is an ongoing threat to those ethno-religious minorities in Myanmar. And in Myanmar, we also know that, for example, Christians are being subjected to horrific atrocities. But again, we are not talking much about those cases. In China, the Uyghur community have been subjected to, again, what we classify as genocide by the regime. Close to 1 million have been placed in so-called re-education camps, and there they will be subjected to indoctrination. They will be stripped of their religious and cultural identity. They will be subjected to rape and sexual violence as well. Their children will be removed from them. So we are hearing horrific stories from China at this very moment. And there are, of course, many other cases of similar atrocities around the world, but they are not necessarily receiving enough attention from states, from international organizations, and from media, unfortunately. But apart from atrocities, where we see that the atrocities meet the legal definition of genocide, there are many other cases that require some attention, and I will just mention one case. And this is the case of Christian and Hindu religious minority women and girls in Pakistan. We know that approximately 1,000 of Hindu and Christian religious minority girls are being abducted every year, subjected to forced marriage, forced conversion, and live with the abductor, with the perpetrator. And unfortunately, not enough is being done to rescue them and reunite with the families. Of course, a lot of the atrocities that we work on happen far from home, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything about them. And indeed, for example, in case of genocide, we have a duty. We have several duties under the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And among others, these are the duties to prevent and punish the crime of genocide. So of course, states should act to prevent the materialization of a serious risk of genocide. So just very briefly referring to what the duty actually says. According to the International Court of Justice, the duty to prevent genocide should be triggered at the very moment a state learns, or should have normally learned, of a serious risk of genocide, and then to act again to make sure that those atrocities do not happen, and according to the, of course, possibilities. And in many cases, such horrific atrocities as genocide, but also crimes against humanity, war crimes, are not going to happen in Poland, in other European countries. But we have a legal and moral obligation to act and to help those people targeted because of their religion or belief. And what we can do, we as citizens of different European countries, but also governments, but also NGOs, experts, and many more, we need to engage in advocacy. We need to emphasize why we believe that it is important to stand up for people who cannot do it for themselves. And we've seen that, for example, in the case of the Yazidis persecuted by Daesh. We've seen civil society coming together and raising the case of the Yazidis and Christian minorities again and again, and ensuring that states act and respond to the horrific atrocities that were happening in Syria and Iraq back 2014, 2015, and the following years. So we need to do that for other religious minorities persecuted because of their religion or belief. We need to speak up for them because they don't have the voice right now. The very idea behind the UN Day commemorating victims of acts of violence based on religion or belief was to make sure that we put the victims at the center of everything that we do on the topic of freedom of religion or belief, that we work together to ensure that we prevent the atrocities or prevent similar atrocities in the future. What we've seen over the years is that the UN and other international institutions talk about the right to freedom of religion and belief, or talk about violence based on religion or belief whenever something bad happens. But this is not good enough. We need to ensure that we engage in those conversations on a regular basis without waiting for horrific atrocities. So we need that. This is the only way how we can actually prevent such atrocities in the future. So we need to work together. We need to work on an action plan to ensure that we act on early warning signs, that we act whenever we see some red flags of mass atrocities to come. We don't wait for the atrocities actually happen before we act. And this is the very idea behind the day, that we on the 22nd August every year, we stop for a moment and we think, okay, what is happening and where, and what can we do together to actually address whatever is happening out there, and to provide a more comprehensive response and a better response that will actually equip us to prevent similar acts in the future. We mark 22nd of August as the UN Day commemorating victims of acts of violence based on religion or belief. It's of course to remember the victims and survivors of such atrocities. But the main idea behind it was really to make sure that we act to prevent similar atrocities. What better way is to commemorate the victims of the atrocities, if not with actually action to prevent similar atrocities in the future? We cannot allow a situation that we mark the day and we allow other atrocities happen again and again and again. We need to use the memory of the victims of such atrocities based on religion or belief and seek change. And again, the day should drive change, should equip us with new mechanisms, new ways how to address violence based on religion or belief. And this again, to make sure that we don't talk about genocide or international crimes based on religion or belief happening right now or in the future. prevention is key, and prevention is one of the aims behind this day. The organizations that we work with normally engage on the topic of the right to freedom of religion or belief, very broadly construed, and of course the right itself is wide-reaching. We rarely hear about freedom from religion. However, for example, if we look what has been happening in China is precisely that. It's freedom from religion as imposed by the state. This is why we see the persecution based on religion or belief. We see attacks on Christians, attacks on Uyghurs, attacks on Falun Gong practitioners, on all religious or belief minority groups in China. This is also why we see, for example, the Chinese government closing churches, removing Bibles from shops, Bibles or Quran. We've seen also mosques being destroyed, especially in Xinjiang region. So this is definitely a case where we can see that state imposing or removing any signs of religions in the country. So of course, in the case of China, we can definitely talk about state trying to impose freedom from religion and removing any signs of religious identity of any communities in China from the public view.